Yes, so the meeting is being recorded, so don't say anything you would not want recorded forever and ever. And welcome to our part two session. I think you all know I'm Stephanie Thomas, State Representative of the 143rd District, which includes parts of Norwalk, Wilton, and Westport. And welcome to some familiar faces from part one. I think you all know, so I worked for a small business for about 19 years, where I learned a lot. So I was not afraid to open my own business in 2013, but I quickly found that when the ultimate responsibility for payroll, for IT, for accounting, for everything is on your head, it created, some challenges. And I like to say, we're always in constant learning mode. Um, so although I had my business, I feel like I started a second small business, and that was called VoteStephanieThomas.com. And that was my political campaign. And I found out very quickly that running a business and running a campaign are very similar. But one thing I had never done in my business that I had to do all the time in my campaign was social media, trying to figure out how to build followers, trying to figure out how to make sure, how to use it for fundraising, engagement, reporting, and just making people feel like I was someone they could communicate with. So when I sent out a business survey in the district earlier this year, the number one answer that I got back from every business owner, and we received about 150 of these, was that how can they maximize social media for ROI, how to get the word out about their business, how to do it. So
Right.
that is why we're doing this part two. So I'm very happy to welcome back Joseph Williams and Denise Whitford from the Connecticut Small Business Development Center. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to them. They were much better than me at explaining their resume. So I will let them introduce themselves and jump right in. After their presentation, we'll do some Q&A. But we have a small enough group, so if questions come up, just raise your hand or put it in the chat and we will chime in. So without further ado, I turn it over to Joe and Denise.
Thanks so much, Representative Thomas. We really appreciate that. I'm going to turn that over to Joe, actually, if he wants to start off by introducing himself, and then I'll lead right in after my introduction.
Thanks, Denise. Thanks, Representative Thomas. My name is Joe Williams. I am the Capital Team Lead for the Connecticut Small Business Development Center. I'm also a business advisor, international trade specialist here in the state of Connecticut. So welcome, everyone. Hopefully you get something useful out of this. And Denise, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Joe. I'm also a team lead with the Small Business Development Center and a business advisor. My team is the customer acquisition team. We focus a lot on marketing, procurement, and international trade. And I also hold a certified global business professional credential and certification. So today, I just want to say that I'm going to be starting off the majority of this presentation, but Joe being on the Capital team, there's a direct tie to customer acquisition and social media. And as we've already heard, it's critical to businesses, whether you're doing fundraising or you're trying to stabilize your base and grow that base. I'd like to start off by just indicating that social media, what it is for your business and how we measure it. And whether you're looking at building your brand awareness or connecting with clients or even boosting search engine optimization. In many cases, it might even be building your mailing list or how can you drive more revenue. We're going to dive into a couple of those topics. If we can go to the first slide, which is the agenda, we're going to cover some social media trends and terms and also look at some of the platforms. We're going to look at managing and measuring, as well as considerations during and after COVID-19. We know that this changed our world and our view of how we market our business, how we promote it and keep those key messages. And so I want to tell you that today's presentation is very, data heavy or content heavy. So if we could go to the next slide, I would appreciate that. The next one, there you go. I want to talk about 4 basic trends and basically getting you set up to understand that it's really a balance of your public and your private engagement. And when we think about that journey between your public and private engagement with your customers, your employees, and stakeholders, we want to be able to think about that in terms of how you create things like your Instagram or your Facebook page and how you send those advertisements or those messages directly out there to create a private or a public conversation. Whatever you put there sometimes is forever and ever embedded. So we always want to make sure that that message is clear. There's ways to automate the easy stuff, as we say, in blending automation with human connection. Sometimes that builds a deeper relationship on those private channels, and other times it makes your job a lot easier and more effective and efficient. And the last thing is looking at keeping that respect of the function and the nuances of those private channels. We want to be very clear about the value that you provide. And that can be a value proposition, but it can also be the value that you bring to somebody else that's out there. If we could go to the next slide, please. We think about the second trend, and it's going to be building that trust within the customer, demonstrating that you have some kind of empathy, that there's a personal side to it. And we think about this in terms of about 3/4 of the people who look to their employer these days. They want their employer to be that trusted institution. They think that critical types of things that come up, their CEO should respond in a very professional way to a challenging situation, and they should expect them to speak up. But before that's done, if you are that CEO, you want to think about it before you do it. Others say, just get in and do it, and we'll talk about it. But the true purpose of that discussion is to really think about what you're putting forth in terms of a marketing campaign. Is it short term or long term? Leadership is expected from the top. And so building a very strong reputation, we found that through the data, it's a top down, and particularly that's very important for those who want to earn trust of those customers that are out there. Particularly millennials will want to have that trust established right from the beginning. Strong brand protection is also important, especially when we're thinking about crisis situations. And when we think about running through a crisis, most of us never thought a pandemic would come in. But what were your policies? What was your technology that you had to plug in? If you were able to pivot and look at that technology and how to leverage, you did really good, but you learned how to respond. We always joke in some ways, we learn how to fly the plane as we're building it. And that sometimes was the case with a lot of folks during COVID. But again, thinking about how employees can be that advocacy and making that advocacy a priority within your business. Your staff can act as a brand ambassador, and so can your customers as well as your stakeholders. If we can go to the next slide, please. The next trend that I want to really focus on as we go through this, and you keep these things in mind, that is about 60%, which is more than half of the people on the internet, say that they've watched a video on Facebook and Twitter or Snapchat or some other mechanism. Sometimes they go to websites. For example, I just bought a bunch of appliances in my own house, not my choice. They all started failing, so it was my turn to buy them. And not one of them came with a user manual. Instead, there were websites that I needed to go to look at the user's manual. Now, fortunately, I've been cooking and storing food for a long time, so I kind of figured out where the door was. But all those little nuances with the computer and the software that's involved, it was fascinating, state-of-the-art things. So keep that in mind, that we want to think about the emphasis on the new formats and how those things are changing every day in day-to-day activities. And we want to think about that in terms of growing those niche platforms. So we want to make sure that your employees get that too, that brand message isn't just yours, it's others. And then thinking about how we engage with TikTok. Keep in mind that TikTok might not be for everybody, but it is right now. And so we want to think about that in terms of where you would be exposed, and positive exposure can come out there. It's your brand, and your social content should be something that you manage through that process. If we could go to the next slide, please. The last trend that I want to talk about, again, is what we're talking here. And if you've noticed on the slides, it said for 2020. I really focused it on what we learned from data from the social media trends from last year, because those are still applicable this year. It's almost as if we've been frozen in time temporarily. But we want to consider marketing in a couple of different ways. And again, that's going to be building the brand and the preferences so that we can look at that price sensitivity, but be able to manage it a little bit differently. When there are supply chain disruptions, how do you pivot and leverage your social media to communicate long-term growth opportunities and profit with your customers? That's a really challenging thing to manage. And how do you address that? Well, sales activation and looking at how you convert somebody's brand preference into an immediate response is going to be really important. And that could mean higher return on your investment. And what does that mean? Well, if someone is coming to you because you are the lowest price, suddenly supply chain disruption changes that. And you've got to really think about how you communicate that message in another way. But we also want to use the full funnel approach in making sure that whenever you're doing those advertising pieces, is it a one-time ad or is it a longer term campaign? So we would recommend in some cases a longer term campaign so you can create that funnel advertising and get more bang for the buck. And then again, looking at and leveraging different types of social media in those campaigns and making sure that you allow time in your schedule and with your team and with your customers to plan and measure and figure out what's working and what's not. If we could go to the next slide, please. I want to talk very briefly about why you would want to use social media. And I've listed things here, and I'm not going to read all of them to you, but the why converts to a number of different questions and a number of different answers. And is it about brand awareness, for example? Well, when we look at the world population, if you have a website or a landing page and you're on social media, as most of the world is, it's only natural for you to begin to market there or people to find you that way. And you can boost your customer engagement by increasing and stabilizing your communications between businesses and customers. It allows you to reach that larger audience. Joe and I shared with you a little earlier that it's not just about marketing to your local community. It's about marketing to different parts of the country or North America or even the globe. And if you build that community the right way, you can be successful. Now, all that said, I think it's also important to understand that you've got to be prepared for that. Prepared in terms of your inventory and your staff training, their knowledge base, but also your access to capital. Do you have enough working capital to get through that position too? So when you're generating those leads and you're driving traffic to your website, are you thinking about how that's going to impact your business? Joe, as I take a drink of my tea, do you want to comment on anything up to this point?
I think you're doing a great job. I think you've actually covered some of the first points. I think in this pandemic and post-pandemic, I think what individual businesses, small business owners need to understand right now is one, what worked during the pandemic. So what were you doing before the pandemic? What was working while you're in the pandemic and we're still there now? But then what will the social media look like? And I think we're going to go into that. And I liked how Denise kind of told you we're in a holding pattern. We've been in a holding pattern probably for the last 16 months or so. We're to continue to be there. We'll probably last into the fall. That will be just like this. So planning ahead, we're really looking toward, deep into winter, next spring, as everything gets back to normal. What is the pivots that you should be doing? That's one of the key words that we've been using from a social media standpoint, a marketing standpoint, is the pivot. Is it time for your business in order to survive? Did you have to pivot? What does that pivot look like? Is it going to require you to have more gross revenue, more of a credit line, more of establishment? Do you need to take on more customers? Have you lost customers? And who is your future customer? So these are things that you have to constantly think about. Who is that audience that we're really looking for? And how do we go and how do we address it? And as you look at this sheet right here on this slide, it actually talks about some of the key aspects that you really need to look at. I think the customer base probably is the one of the most important, making sure, hey, did I lose, 20, 30%, 40% of my base, or did I maintain? And then if I did maintain, how can I now grow that base to be a larger base of customers? Back to you, Denise. Thanks,
Joe. Appreciate that. So thank you for letting me get that cup of tea. My allergies have been flaring. It really helped me to pause there for a moment. If we could go to the next, oh, great, you did. You moved forward to the next slide. As Joe indicated, there's a lot of questions that folks say, why do I need social media? I enjoy being off the grid. Well, I wanted to put a few stats up here in front of you as you start thinking about how many people globally use the internet. How much social media activity is there? Again, I'm not going to read these to you, but you can certainly see that the average person spends about 3 hours a day on the internet. I have young adults in my household. They're 23 and 26, and I assure you, they spend a lot more than 3 hours on the internet every day. But I find that as an SBDC advisor, we too spend a lot of time with our clients, helping them navigate and understand what this means. The bottom center of that page shows 54% of those businesses use social media. Customers go to social media. They don't necessarily go to their laptop, but it needs to be ready on their cell phone. And I think that that's going to be really important for us to understand that that's where your audience is going, especially over times of COVID. And that impact can be very positive. The customer experiences when businesses have pivoted has been extremely positive. That social media targets, yes, 18 to 29 year olds, but we're finding that 30 to 60-year-olds now are becoming more adept at getting into the internet. So your market may have changed. And to do that analysis and understand where you're at is going to be really important. If we can move to the next slide. I'd like to share with you just this grid. And I've been trying to keep a lot of different colors because I said this is a very long PowerPoint. I'm going to try to move through it smoothly. And you can see the top couple of platforms, of social media platforms that folks use. YouTube overwhelmingly. As I said earlier, our shift is more away from face-to-face over the past year into social media, but we still like to see the interaction. Even today, we've all come together virtually, but it's through YouTube, very video heavy. Facebook is the next one on that list that's the most used because you can post all kinds of really great pictures and surveys and video. And again, as you continue to go through the Messenger and Instagram and Twitter, I'm going to cover some of the top ones as we keep moving forward. Can we go to the next slide, please? Before you get to social media, or even while you're in it, you can certainly ask yourself if you've defined what your objectives are. And so we want to suggest that you know what your social media marketing goals are. And if you're trying to grow your audience or spread the news about your business or your product by word of mouth, fantastic. But we want to also encourage you to engage with your customers in a variety of other ways, considering they're spending between 3 and 4 hours or more on social media platforms. And I would suggest that we start with that by identifying some of the gaps in your marketing plan. Is it okay to just market traditional ways? Of course. Depending upon your product or service, we're going to be suggesting that you look at these other options today as we move forward. Let's move to the next slide. I think this one kind of defines a little bit more, or in a very profound, colorful way, about where the majority of people are going. And just so you understand the nuances of each one of these, there are some platforms that are not for everyone. And so I want you to understand that there are ways that you should be evaluating the time and energy and resources that you can dedicate to maintaining any 1, 2, or more of these platforms. Don't think again that every one of these makes sense for every business. It's better to manage one platform really well than to do multiple ones really poorly. So keep that in mind as you think about a regular schedule for putting posts out there or putting information, and then monitoring that traffic that's going on and the conversation. And so I just want to make sure, again, I'm not going to read these, but as you can see, there are some that are more appropriate for a younger crowd or different types of products or services, and others that are better for more professional settings. We're going to go through that a little bit more in detail. If we could move to the next slide, and then the key statistics for Facebook. And as I start thinking about Facebook, I know many of us are on Facebook. I might be reiterating a lot of things that you already know, but there's a lot of people on Facebook, about 190 million people worldwide. And when we start thinking about some of the demographic information in front of you, I want to point out a couple of trends that have happened here. The younger crowd, 18 to 24-year-olds, have declined in their usage on Facebook, while the 25 to 35 years old have increased by nearly 35%. So the biggest population growth here has been with the 55 and over crowd. Their traffic on Facebook has increased more than 80%. And when we start looking at that, it also skews a lot more toward females than it does for males. So what I want to summarize on this page is keep in mind that the primary shoppers for households, as many of you may already know, are women age 24 to 54 years old. Why? Because they're in prime child rearing years. They're buying clothing and food and household goods and so on and so forth. They're making the primary business decisions over and over and over. They do surveys on Facebook. Does anybody have recommendations on what I should buy? So keep that in mind. If it's a consumer product or a service that you offer, those folks you want to target in many ways. We could go to the next slide. Keep in mind when you're working on Facebook that having the right tone and being as human as possible is going to be critical, demonstrating that you have empathy for what the clients need and you want to attract them to spend more money. You can do an increase there, or you can do what we call, instead of a wow, a whoa. So we want to be very sensitive to the fact that how you communicate your message should be intentional to strengthen that relationship, but be aware of what your brand conveys and develop that affinity to bring that person or that group in. So I wanted to share a few things in here in terms of the message, but also consider live streaming. Not everyone is meant to be on video, and it's not a comfort level. Maybe there's somebody else within your business that can create that. Live streaming is when you actually post the video in real time, again, like we're doing today, and then it's saved for view at later time. And I would say when you do those types of things, whether it's live stream or recorded video, we want to add something extra. What is that product or service that makes them feel good, that engages them in some way? So I would say that if you monitor the activity on Facebook, you're checking with the community to make sure that you're hitting a heartfelt post that has intention to drive them in without being obvious about that intention. You don't want to sound pushy on Facebook. If we can go to the next slide, I'm just going to cover this one really quickly. I'm not going to read or ask you to go through any of these hashtags, but I think that when you cross-pollinate what you're doing on Facebook with Twitter and Instagram and your website and other mechanisms, remember hashtags are a really effective tool to get you there. One example I'm going to pick out of this is while I was home, working from home during COVID, I started looking at projects to keep myself busy. And that one project was working on my own health and exercise. And you can see the one in the middle is hashtag at home. And you can also go at hashtag at home workout. So some of those things were projects around the house, but other projects were taking care of myself. And so that was a clear message for me to get out and start thinking about how I promote myself, but equally important for you, how you promote your business. Does it connect with what that client is looking for or that prospect? Can you do different types of things with captions or lighthearted things that are very specific that will boost their morale and get them engaged? Is it directed toward their health and safety? Putting good captions out there will help them, but also providing updates. If you're looking for particular types of progress toward a project that you might be doing or a new product that might be coming out, provide the updates. Keep that momentum and keep that energy going. And then again, promoting things where you're doing, looking at during pivots, as we said during COVID, curbside pickup is still available. Many of the restaurants are open now. They're open outdoors, which we're all loving. Many of us have our vaccinations. We're feeling much more comfortable and confident. But what about what we would have to do if it's still going to be available afterwards? The quick story that I share, I went out for Mexican food earlier in the week with my daughter. And in prior years, that restaurant sat in the middle of a parking lot with other buildings around it. Since COVID, they trucked in a bunch of dirt and trees and flowers and put these beautiful tables outside. And that beautiful courtyard is going to stay there from this point forward. So now they're changing their branding, they're changing their photographs, they're changing a lot of different things, and they're promoting al fresco dining. So keep in mind, those pivots can last a long time too. If we can move to the next slide, I want to talk very briefly about brand ambassadors. And as you can see here, there's a couple of reasons that I really want to enforce the brand ambassadors, but I want to start off by saying I had a client who started as a home-based business making cosmetics, and she really leveraged brand ambassadors beautifully through social media. She engaged with Kylie Jenner and with I'm trying to think, Kylie Kardashian, I should say, and Kate Hudson. She makes a series of lip balms and lip scrubs. And those folks became brand ambassadors by promoting her throughout social media. But then she also tapped into a lot of her employees and customers to be those brand ambassadors. And what that did was it humanized the brand to someone that people look up to or go to for information or affiliate with in some way as a celebrity. But it also helped her publicize throughout a variety of networks. It was very positive word of mouth, and it helped her grow that brand, but it also helped her protect that brand reputation. If you're in a competitive field, and believe me, cosmetics are very competitive, it was her way of penetrating that market and then protecting it with that brand ambassador. And that continues to build as she's been on morning shows, the Dr. Oz show, and a variety of other ways. She was brilliant at social media and how she did that. And so if we could go to the next slide. And then what I really wanted to say about that is how to stay up to date with different trends and analyzing what your competitor's doing. Now, the cosmetic company that I was talking about doesn't just rely on her brand ambassadors and her social media and her website. She really looks at this type of analysis when you start thinking about what your competitors are doing, gathering that data and looking at where you are on the Facebook page. And as you can see on this particular page, there's an example. But knowing how to ask the right questions and where you go through there, are you looking at your Facebook likes? How many engaged users? And are you looking at the video stats? Are people looking at the videos that you're posting? Really important to understand if you're spending the time and energy and money to put it out there, are people using it? And then are you asking yourself the right questions? What kind of message is resonating with the folks that I want to target? And what types of posts do they share the most? How many or who are your Facebook users and where are they? Are they here in Connecticut or somewhere else in the world? And then we want to figure out how we leverage that post to really target additional expansion in those markets. So with that, I'm going to pause again for a moment and say, Joe, if you have something to add, I'm going to take another sip of tea.
Hey, Denise, I think you're doing a wonderful job. One thing I like to just to reiterate what Denise was talking about is the use of Facebook and its Facebook ads. It's probably one of the useful, less expensive ways of advertising on social media. That and Google AdWords, using your Facebook page, using live video that you can actually save into perpetuity to reach your audience. And I think with the statistical numbers that Denise has been giving you, you now know from a geographical standpoint the type of audience from an age standpoint, if you will. So if I was targeting, the 35-year-old, 30 to 40, I know that, okay, this particular form of social media, which is Facebook, they're probably using. And, Instagram, and then we'll talk about, Twitter and LinkedIn and other things. But you have to really segment your marketing dollars. And that's really what we're doing. One thing we recommend, usually take 3% of the overall budget and spending on marketing. That's usually the average that a business spends on marketing or should at least spend on marketing to reinvest in your company. At the federal level in our government, we do the same thing. We spend 3% of the national budget on R&D, which we spoke about that the other day. So you, like the government, like your business, we know that there's certain trends that you should be following. There's certain basic rules of engagement around social media. If we think back, 15, 20 years ago, when we weren't really talking as much for social media, we were still doing traditional type of marketing, the snail mail, the letters, the billboards, and of course, naturally, the word of mouth, which to me, networking, when it all said and done, is probably the best form of advertising. When one person can tell 10 people, 10 people tell 100 people, and we know bad news always travels very quickly. Good news, it takes longer. With the advent of social media, what we've seen is the same thing, but when you have 190 million people on just one platform, and there's probably 4 or 5 others there, that is a significant amount of audience and potential penetration for your product or service. So take a heed. I'm turning it back over to Denise, and because I'm going to take a sip of water.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. If we could go to the next slide, I'd like to talk about one of the other most popular ones. And this is a very colorful slide and a busy one, but the main things that I want to communicate about Instagram is that it's extremely popular again amongst younger adults. 28% of the adults online use Instagram, and more than half of those adults are 18 to 24 year olds. When we start thinking about the population and the high usage in this medium, the demographic information is largely African American and Hispanic. The African American percentage is 47%, and the Hispanic population who use the Instagram platform is about 38%. So if you have clients that you want to target that demographic, I would suggest that largely it would be Instagram rather than Facebook that you would utilize as your main social media platform. Advertising potential in this medium is 850 million users worldwide. And about a third of those stories on Instagram are all from businesses. So Instagram isn't just personal. Keep in mind, you wouldn't be keeping your Instagram personal account. I'm sorry, let me say that again. You could keep your Instagram personal account, but you want to establish an individual one for your business. Always keep them separate. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I'm not going to walk you through all the steps of creating an Instagram store, but I do want to reiterate there are a number of commonsensical steps that really don't make common sense if you've never been in there. So first, as usual, you need to set up an Instagram account that's separate, again, as I said, from your personal Instagram account, and you want to create a bio. Remember that your business is speaking directly to your target audience, not you. And so the tone and content of what you put there needs to be very important. And keeping in mind that your Instagram captions are really important. Less is more. Use less words and use more emojis. It just tends to be the way that Instagram is successful and how we move them forward. And then creating a business link to your Instagram bio so that they can find your business and your website back and forth. A lot of folks come to us and say, I have a website, but no one's telling me that they're going to that website. Your website needs to be hooked up to social media and Google, and I'll cover that a little bit more as we go forward. If that's not done, your customers aren't going to find you. And there are a few tips and tutorials that each of these platforms will help you navigate the way, and then we're here to work with you on it. But keep in mind, you can link up your newsletters, any kind of blogs or white papers that you might write. It can all be put out there through Instagram in that bio information as well.
Also, Denise, when you look at Instagram, I encourage everyone on the sound of my voice to go to Instagram and to look at different things. Now, when I go to Instagram, I'm looking for small businesses and what content delivery they are giving me, what free information. You know, if you're a subject matter expert, you should at least blog, or you should at least entice, not selling, is what we call consultations type of selling, where you're giving information constantly, little bits, not much, but give them tidbits, and then leading the viewer to somewhere else, whether it's the website or you're making them take on action steps. That's what Instagram, the most successful small business I see, they're giving out information and then they're asking for someone to take action. Action, not necessarily for them to do business with them, but to better themselves of why. So I'll give you a case in point. If I was a small business and I want to know how to create an LLC or how to use business credit, for instance, you know, I may put tidbits out there that may give you a few of the first beginning steps of that. But because you think and become a trusted person or a trusted advisor, people do business with people they trust. How do you do that in social media? That's the real trick. So what live streaming does and live video does and content creation using social media, it gives you that, especially in this pandemic where we're all at home. We're not really necessarily interacting. We're not really seeing individuals face to face. So what is the next best thing? It is utilizing things that Denise and I have already spoke about, but I really encourage you to take a look, especially if you find things in your own community that of interest to you. Because that community, if you look at Instagram, we follow one friends and then we follow different businesses or things of interest. That's usually how Instagram is actually utilized, which is very different than Facebook. As Denise is a reminder, when we look at Facebook, different demographic, younger demographic, but we're finding that that mother is really looking for something for their family. And through demographic and social graphic information, we then, or you then can pinpoint how do you want to then grow your company. Now you're using your marketing dollars in a more wiser fashion and you're getting more bang for your buck. Back to you, Denise.
Wholeheartedly well said. And I think that on the dovetailing on that in terms of boosting that traffic to the website, keep in mind that when you're putting your website, your Instagram, your Facebook, all of those different social medias, you want to be very consistent about your brand, your name, your photos, the bio that you put out there. And again, very photo heavy, very video heavy. Avoid hard selling. I think, again, this is about connecting with the person on the other end. Even when you're a business, you want to connect to people. Avoid hard selling. The tools that you have, make sure that you use those editing tools. Again, that things change constantly. Think about the ways that you can stand out. Sometimes people change their Facebook cover page. Consider that also on Instagram as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. The three things that I want to cover on this slide come to reaching out to a large audience. And again, I think that when we think about places that we can find apps like Square that can research different popular trending hashtags, and then we start thinking about putting that list, how do you reach out to those other places and create fans? We want to collect a mix of big hit hashtags and continue to move those hashtags to create a whole different listing within that profile. And what we want to do is close the gap in communication between online buyers and sellers. And Instagram does offer that opportunity to really enhance your customer service and give direct feedback from customers, but it also helps you create those relationships in converting a visitor to a loyal customer. The second thing is looking at that depth of that customer relationship. When you're writing your captions, you want to make sure that they're an active tone and they're inviting captions that get people jump started in there and get them engaged. And sometimes that comes across when you offer contests, but you want to decide what it is that you're offering and how you're going to give it away. And by all means, when you're giving something away in terms of, hey, so-and-so won my contest, you want to capture some great photographs again and video and get that out there, and even testimonials from the folks, get them to be another brand advocate for you. And again, looking at the third bullet point here is measuring your success and continually growing Instagram. There's a number of ways to do that. You want to make sure that you're tracking your fans, looking at the posting schedules, but also taking advantage of and looking at things like some of your other posts, making sure they're fun, maintaining a schedule. If you want to post on Instagram, you want to make sure that you're posting at specific regular times, making sure that making sure that post is reaching out to the folks who need to be there, direct messages, using again the hashtags, but sticking with a filter that's going to help you define what you need and where that business is going to be. If we can go to the next slide, I'm going to jump into Google here. And I think many of you may be used to Google. It's probably your main search engine. And some people use Bing, which is fine. But Google Analytics is going to be a little bit different than Google Ads and Google My Business. And so I want to differentiate a little bit here, where the analytics is the mechanism that tracks that information for who visits that website, and then how they interact within that website and within that business. And you can use those insights from the different analytics to make better decisions and where that business activity should be for you. How are you going to market yourself online? Those analytics also can link you to Google paid ads. And when we look at a more comprehensive understanding of that space in business, it's one of the free ways to get you through that process. In other times, you're going to be paying for those Google ads. So keep in mind, you need to have a budget of time, energy, and money. Just wanted to leave a few tidbits here and from some of this data is that the average person performs, I would say, between 3 and 4 searches per day out of Google. So I'm going to suggest that investing in Google ads might be a good way for you to capitalize on those Google searches And again, thinking about the process and how you would get there, and working with the Google Support Center to do that. But I want to tip you off and say, pick the words that you absolutely know will be targeted, and then stay with a daily maximum budget. You want to be able to select a start and end date of that campaign as well. You don't want it to go on forever and ever. It might be a day or a week or a month, but you want to make sure you're very specific. Otherwise, you keep running the bill. You want to customize those ads again to reach that specific location or specific demographic when you're doing the AdWords. And if analytics are something that you want to get a good example on, I would say, if we think about Hartford, for example, you can actually track what kinds of customers and where those customers are from Asylum Avenue, for example, in Hartford, and how you can capitalize on the popularity in moving the advertising to that region. What kinds of products and services are the people on Asylum Avenue buying? It helps you hone in on consumer spending and behaviors. So I just want to make sure that you're looking at that in terms of how it would work best. If we can move to the next slide. So while Google My Business isn't just necessarily a standard social media platform, I just want to let you know that it is still a very powerful tool for no cost, in which you can get through and use your business. But you want to make sure that those elements are tied to your social media, and that your company website, all those things are adding visibility to what your business currently does, where they are, when you're open, all those good things. A really good tip here too is we're going to be inviting Grow with Google back to Hartford and Connecticut in the coming months. They do these workshops at no cost. And if they're going to be coming to a location near you, I would encourage you to do it. They're very thorough, so that they can look at your analytics, teach you how to go through it. There's also free tutorials on their site that will get you in there. But you want to make sure that when you're Googling your business, that it's set up correctly as a summary. That if we're looking for hairdressers in Stamford, that your business address and phone number, the hours of operation, the directions, the Google reviews, and all those social media links are on your landing page there. We want to make sure that that's there, and Google does a great job in updating you and getting you through that. If we can move to the next slide. I just put an example on this slide of what Google My Business Insights can provide for you. And if you look at this page, this is an example of where we would go to find the customer listing and search queries and look at the customers that found you on Google. But you can get all the data in terms of how effective your Google Analytics or your Google page and Google My Business are operating. We can even look at how many people have gone in there to either post photos or review photos, but you want to make sure that you're putting things up there. And then the most important thing to me is putting a very short, direct summary of what your business is known for. And if you think about it, customers' opinions about a restaurant or a cafe, they're going to tell you whether they felt it was cozy or romantic, or they had really good cocktails, or it was farm to table. They're going to make those comments. So we want to make sure that when you put things out there, that Google is picking it up and your search engine optimization is turned on, and it can get that valuable information out to customers with solid descriptions. If we can go to the next slide, I want to continue to move on in light of time. The next one that I want to talk a little bit about is YouTube. And I've put some key statistics up here again, and I don't want to drown you in statistics today. But again, there are 2 billion people globally that use this particular mechanism. Again, the trends that I shared earlier in this presentation, very photo, very video heavy. YouTube is extremely popular. If you leverage YouTube the right way in giving informationals, and again, I told you I bought appliances. Everything I needed to know about these appliances is on a YouTube video. I was surprised, and it was really well professionally done. If we think about who's using it, where they're at, what kind of marketing generation is happening, the demographic information, again, it's a very powerful message if it can be leveraged correctly. And I would suggest that if you want to manage your brand, YouTube is going to be one of the most effective ways to do it. I would rather suggest that you do a professional YouTube video about the pros not necessarily the cons, but the pros and the challenges, and how you can problem solve with your clients on YouTube, but also talking about all the positives that your products and your services offer, and demonstrate that you manage your brand and your reputation before someone else does. If we can go to the next slide. Some of those tools here, again, it is highly viewed marketing vehicle, as I said earlier, but we got to watch the content and make sure that you understand that people are twice as likely to share a video and that video content than they are to have some kind of verbal or written communication about your business. And I just want to quote some stats here. And 2 out of 3 people say they would like to learn about a product or service by watching a short video. I'm one of them. And 8 out of 10, 80% of the people say that they've been convinced to buy a product or service by watching its brand video. Those are powerful statistics. So when we think about the average visitor spending at least 15 minutes daily on a site, and you have approximately eight unique pages per view per day, we're starting to look at numbers when you do the math for the number of hours a day of over 1 million strikes linking you potentially to YouTube. Again, all somebody needs to spend is 15 minutes a day and look at 8 unique pages. And you do the math on the population and the number of products and pages out there. That's a lot of opportunity for you. If we can go to the next slide, I want to just briefly talk about these 11 points. And I don't want to go too long into these, but I just wanted to say, when you promote your business on YouTube, these are some tips. I think it's really important that your titles are straight up and they're easy to follow. They're easy to find. You have to step up your search engine optimization with your website, connecting to social media so people can find you. Know your audience and what they want. Do they want lip scrubs today? And what flavors do they want? The scents and flavors or consumer preferences are so important. Would you put cotton candy flavor out this week, or would you put, what can we do for Christmas? Cinnamon apple or pumpkin flavor at this time? Maybe not. Maybe you want to hold that off until the fall or Christmas time. Thanksgiving and Christmas, those types of things sell more. So we want to think about what the audience needs at that time. And that involves you engaging with your community. What are their likes and preferences? And then when you get that done, customizing those thumbnails and making sure that you're cross-promoting, not just within your own social media and website, but again, amongst your supply chain, your distribution channel, and some of your other brand advocates out there. I don't know if anyone's familiar with what an SERP is, but that's the search engine page in which you want to look at the results. So it's search engine results page, and you want to look at those numbers to make sure that you're getting the right information. And the rest of this, I think, makes sense when I said earlier, you want to live stream and then make sure that you're publishing on a regular schedule. If we could go to the next page. Joe, did you want to add anything before I jump into Pinterest here?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Pinterest is not for everyone, but those people who have been on Pinterest really enjoy it. And as many of you know, it is a virtual pin board. It offers a lot of different types of pin board and products and all different types of services that you can manage and collect pins. And I think that if you share this with followers and you look at what's happening on Pinterest, it really gives you an opportunity to do some great things there. Generally, as you know, some of you may know, you sign up by using your Facebook or your Twitter page, and you get into those accounts and you find friends. It makes it a lot easier for you to invite people into your Pinterest and all different directions in there. Some key stats that I want to share here: almost 9 million unique monthly visits occurred in November of 2020. And when we think about 4.9 million or nearly 5 million, that's a lot of opportunity. It's not as popular as the other ones that we've said, but there are specific things that we target here. Visitors are largely women, about 60% women, and they tend to be middle-aged, 25 to 45. And the reason for that is it tends to come back to different types of improvements or different types of hobbies and decorating ideas, planning a wedding party or saving recipes and tracking clothing. When we start looking at those design ideas, it's really an inspiration that we're trying to attract. And so I've had a few of my clients do this recently. They tested their product, and what they found was it was hugely popular because there was a lot of versatility to that particular product, and it was consumer product related. And they found that people really liked it on Pinterest. Others look at Pinterest in terms of getting ideas and seeing what the trends are so they can adapt their product and relaunch new ones. So it's a good place for you to do some research. If we could go to the next page, just very quickly, just wanted to talk briefly about what you can do to leverage your brand on Pinterest. And again, clearly it's by promoting your products and then featuring different blog posts that you might have out there, sharing videos again and conducting market research, as I indicated, but it's a space for collaboration. Not everybody in the world is going to be a competitor with you. And sometimes your competitor next door is actually a collaborator. Sometimes they don't want to do the exact same thing that you do because they don't have capacity to do it. So you share and you refer back and forth. But it's an opportunity also to expand your website. And it doesn't have to be self-contained, but some people do self-contain their Pinterest board. But you can create an About Us board, put testimonials on it, and even put some documents and history out there and some photos. I think that's why it's so popular. Again, is it works toward those creatives who like to put things out and share. You can also use it, I think a lot of folks have done this in terms of highlighting what their clients and their colleagues and others have done. It's a way to create, again, features and talk about positives and good things that are happening, giving notoriety to some really good examples. And again, I think it comes through as rankings or, again, short videos of what's the best thing to do, best practices. Let me share our ideas with you. You can develop yourself as an influencer in this area as well. If we can move to the next one, I'd like to go to my favorite, which is LinkedIn. I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit about the statistics. And again, I think you get the point on these slides about statistics. It's a huge opportunity. 92% of all business to business marketing is done on LinkedIn. It's a very powerful business forum, and many of us are probably on it. And I think that how do you do it? Well, why do you do it? Why? Well, it's going to demonstrate your area of expertise. It's also going to demonstrate your capabilities of getting out there and increasing web traffic. It builds brand awareness for your company, but also helps you reach decision makers that are out there. There's a lot of different social media platforms that focus on professional networking, including career development, but LinkedIn can really be leveraged nicely for business development. And there's a good way to do it, and there's a not so good way to do it. I'm sure if we're on LinkedIn, all of you have gotten these solicitations in your message box where it says, "Hi, Denise, I'd like to connect with you." And they say that they really like your bio and they want to talk to you a little bit. So you send a message back and say, "Certainly, I'll accept you as a connection." And then they want to sell you life insurance or they want to sell you something else. And that's potentially, in many cases, a big no-no. That's overly aggressive. There's a better way to do that. And I think that when you utilize LinkedIn, there's a way for you to get out there and understand what the demographic challenges might be, or the business to business challenges, or the supply chain challenges, or the buying challenges might be. And you post a blog or an article and you invite people to join in and have a discussion with you. Research has found that that is far more successful than hard selling. And so keep in mind when you're on LinkedIn, there's a correct way to manage that conversation. If we can go to the next slide. Talk a little bit about that in terms of filling in the details of your company page and making sure that your banner, your logo, all of those things, again, are consistent. Keeping updated company information on there is really important. And I'm guilty. I created my LinkedIn page about maybe 8 years ago. And while I've done some updates, I haven't contemporized it. In 8 years, a lot of things have changed in the way that you promote what it is that you do, the organization that you work for, and then how you attract followers. And I'm one of those people that has more than 1,000 followers. How actively do I go out there and put things on LinkedIn? I don't have time to do that, unfortunately, at this time, but it's a vehicle for me to reach out to folks. I will send private messages and say, for example, to my good friend and colleague, Joe, I will say, Joe, I got a message here for you. I think I need to be able to connect you to a client. Would you be willing to reach me by cell phone? And Joe picks up his phone and says, absolutely. And we start talking about it. Now, I use Joe as an example, but it's generally someone outside my organization that I would do that with the client's permission, of course. If you're looking to hire employees, LinkedIn is a wonderful place to post really good information that you can attract the best of the best. You can also go out there and make announcements and invite others to come in and join on that, but it's a professional setting. It is not the same kind of demographic that you would attract through Facebook or Twitter or any of the other things that we've talked about so far. If we can go to the next slide. And then Joe, would you like to add anything about LinkedIn or what we've talked about?
No, one other thing I just like to reiterate is most employers and most companies, that is the new resume. That is certainly the new resume. Before they bring you in for interview, they want to learn about your business. They go straight to your LinkedIn page. 8 years ago, like Denise said, when we came on board to SBDC, we had our LinkedIn professionally done. We brought in an expert and we created these profiles. Just unfortunately, since that time, we haven't had much time to update it, but it was created. And for the sole purpose of branding our department. And so it looks seamless as advisors. So for small businesses, LinkedIn is definitely a place that you should definitely look at. This is where you co-brand with the blogs, information that you really want to share in a professional type of environment. And then you can see a lot of other things of what your competitors are doing as well. And as what Denise has alluded to, this is a great place to find future partners or employees. And without even bringing them in, but you get to get a sense of them from their education to their career advancements or things that they're interested in. So you can actually strike up a different type of conversation or attract a different type of customer. Back to you, Denise.
Appreciate it. Representative Thomas, I realized we have run a little bit long. I have about 10 more slides to review, which I can do very quickly. Would that be something that we should end now, or should I continue on?
I'm wondering if any of the participants have any questions, maybe in case they have to go. I will open it up to them. If you do, just come off mute or raise your hand. I think Jennifer, you look like you're about to say
That's
something.
a problem. Okay. Hi, Denise and Joseph and Stephanie. I have a question regarding branding. I have a lot of content, but for some reason, it's like going in space. We don't get any likes, or if we get likes, maybe 5. And we are posting at least 3 times a week. And it's across the board. It's always been that way. So I'm not sure what it is that
Platform are you using?
I'm sorry.
Platforms are you using?
I use Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the major platforms.
Go ahead. I'm listening. We're still here.
Okay. And I mean, that's the same feedback I'm getting. Everybody look at it and they're like, you don't have a lot of likes and your content is great. So I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, that would be something I'd like to be able to take a look at, because often the content might be really good, but there's a disconnect between the social media again and either your website and your connection to Google. And that would be
Right.
one of the analytics that would want to dive into. More often than not, that's the case.
I always feel on social media, it's also about who you're engaging with. It's more of a two-way than a one-way street compared to, direct marketing. Yeah, I'm working with a client right now and I've been trying to boost their followers, and I think I've only boosted it by about 20 people in 2 months, posting many times daily. So I know there's a disconnect with
Yeah.
who is following them and what they're putting out. And I haven't put my finger on it yet, but it's a common issue. I have a question, if you don't mind, Joseph and Denise. You know, when I work with nonprofit clients, I feel like more so years ago than now, but everybody always said, hey, I'm turning over my social media to whoever is in their office under the age of 25. I'm curious if you, especially now that I think we're in more of a like social media 3.0 era, do you have any thoughts about that, or caveats, or any thoughts about that?
Sometimes I wonder if that's because whoever's turning it over to them is not comfortable with the concepts of social media and website or technology, IT in general. Other times, I think it's because 25-year-olds or so are totally immersed from a very early age and tend to be in that mode of no fear. They will try anything to move it through there. The caution that I send out is, do they understand all of the working components? Would they be willing to try things? Yes. But do they understand all of the working components? So if it's going to be turned over to someone 25 or so, I guess you're saying someone who tends to be a little bit newer in the work world, I would suggest that you put a structure to it, a format of what the expectations are, what you want it to drive, and what you would expect the outcomes to be. When structure is put to that, I think there's a remarkable thing that happens is you get somebody who's new into the work world that doesn't have that fear or apprehension of a barrier, and someone who has experience. Put those two things together and you get a great content, you get great messaging.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Denise, of taking, the younger workforce, but with a more seasoned or mature workforce, of getting that balance, if you will. Yes, they know the technology, they have no fear of the technology, but then it comes to the content. So it's really the mirroring of the two, with the young and the mature, of, okay, here's my audience. I don't necessarily know how to reach my audience. You are on this constantly. You were born with a phone in. You know what I mean? We were a typewriter mode, you know what I mean, and carbon paper. So what you have, that blend, that's where you find the greatest synergy in business. Because if you look at the demographics that Denise has described to you, you're in that 25 to 50-year range is the majority using social media. So they're looking for something very specific. Depending on where they are in their life, many of them are starting families or having young children. That millennial, Gen Z, 25 something year old is, I'm just glad to be here. But they're experts when it comes to the creation of it or the use of social media. What they lack and what we bring to the table is a heavy knowledge base, the subject matter experts or the information gatherers. And now it's like, okay, how am I resonating my message to that Gen Z or that millennial? Well, the millennial would know how they want to receive that specific message, but they will also know how to place that message on the social media platforms that we've talked about. Make sense?
Yeah, I think that's so true, and it's been my experience as well. Give a little structure, make sure you know what your own brand is, so they have those parameters, like what that tone you're going for, and colors, etc. All of that, I think, really important. Any other questions from the audience? And if not, then Denise, maybe like a 5-minute wrap up, if you can.
We can. If we can advance the slideshow, I'm going to just say, the only thing I want to say about Twitter is that folks are usually, Twitter followers are usually 3 times more likely to follow your brand than anything on Facebook. So Twitter is an option for you. If we can skip ahead to the slide that has how do I manage the platforms? I think it's maybe 4 more slides ahead. I just wanted to indicate that you don't have to do this yourself. There's a lot of different options out there. I've mentioned 4 of them. Hootsuite and Sprout Social are the 2 most popular ones. They can help you track all those things. The next slide talks about how to measure, is it working? Have you increased? What do you measure for social media engagement? Key performance indicators are either going to be likes and shares and comments, or if it's website activity, it's going to be the URL clicks and traffic from social media. And if you're measuring what you're doing in terms of brand awareness, thank you for asking that question about the brand. What's your follower growth rate? What percentage over time are the followers there, and what kinds of clicks? And if we can move to the next slide, I just want to remind you that, during COVID, it was really considered a social media crisis, and we've got to be able to put a plan and structure in place and think about how you craft that message in a proactive sense so that you can detect when something's not going right. Is it just a bad day, or is this a potential crisis? And then how to identify where you would go and can put the considerations and responses out there. And if we put the last one here with the action plan, and if we think about once you've set up your goals, and are you putting a social media campaign out there that you've built trust and you've curated stories about what you need to share, you're focusing on the quality of those relationships rather than the number or the quantity of them. You can tailor what it is that you do to your audience. And the next page is just to let you know that I always say this, I think we've been saying this for a while, is social media is like water over ice cubes, and your daily work is the ice cube and the social media is the water. Either way, you put them together and it creates something really cool. I know that's a silly pun, but the last page here is just a reminder. It's just a reminder on how to reach us. And I really enjoyed the opportunity. I didn't realize we went so long, but it was such a privilege to share again today. Thank you.
Quite a good job wrapping up in those 5 minutes, and we started 5 minutes late, so I thought this was incredibly helpful. I'll say it again. The Connecticut Small Business Development Center has so much to offer. We could have done like 2 all-day sessions, and I think still had questions. I think if Brittany or Max, actually everyone here, I think has the link. Please sign up. Thank you for coming. You know how to reach all of us now. Feel free to be in touch, two-way street with my office or the Small Business Development Center. Denise, Joe, you guys are wonderful. One of these days, I'm going to get around to calling you myself. And thank you for doing this. And have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Max and Brittany.
Bye.
Great
Thank
one.
you.
Thank you.